Nothing to do with the presentation. All right, so tonight I've been given the opportunity to speak to you on the occult, Satanism, witchcraft. I don't want you to be disappointed that the evening will not be filled with a lot of salacious stories about people's heads turning around 360 degrees and throwing up pea soup if you saw the Exorcist movie or those kind of things. Because what I would rather do is inform you about the worldview, if you will, the view of the nature of reality that comprises the occult, specifically Satanism and witchcraft, but we're going to discover tomorrow how this same false view of reality is infecting the church. So I may make a few oblique references to what tomorrow's topic will be, just to sort of encourage you perhaps to come back. Now, I always have to tell audiences that invariably the PowerPoints that I've put together, because I get to teach them in courses that extend over an entire 14-week semester, invariably the PowerPoints are very, very long. And so what I like to do when I've given 30, 40 minutes, and I don't know why I'm doing my hand this way, but at any rate, I don't know if that's the hand signal for 30 or 40 minutes. For some reason, it just felt like the thing to do. Is just select a few slides out of the presentation to highlight. So, but I want you to be able to get a copy of these slides. So I want you to go to my website and you can get a PDF deck of all of the slides. There's two reasons you want to do that. One, as I've already said, because some of the slides are hidden that we won't talk about. I may say, hey, I've got more quotes from this guy, so you can get the deck. So that's one reason you want to get the PDF deck. The other is that there may be a citation, for example, and you go, whoa, I didn't write it down quick enough. What page was that on? Don't worry about it. You can just go to the PDF deck and download those. So here's how you get to the PDF deck. Okay, that was worth coming tonight. Just for that. Forget the occult. I want to see that again. All right, so you go to richardghowe.com. All right, don't leave out the G. Stands for good looking. Okay, Murray, every time I say that, people laugh. Well, why do they laugh when I say that my G could be for good looking? Anyway. So you go to richardghowe.com. Oh, I like that. All right, now you can see across the top the tabs. So there's one tab right there, resources. So you click on that, and you'll get 4 choices. Now, if I make a reference to, hey, there's a paper on my webpage, then you can go to papers. You can't see that little thing, can you? But you can see that papers, multimedia. Some of the papers I've written, other people have written, links to the internet, these kind of things. Multimedia, pretty self-explanatory, MP3s, MP4s, things that I've done, things other people's done, things that are linked on the internet. Stuff from Midway Community Church. I bring you greetings from Midway Community Church in Alpharetta, Georgia in the United States. So they've been following my treks for these past 4.5 weeks throughout the country and been praying for the ministry here, and they're all excited about what God's doing with the saints and our brothers and sisters in South Africa. So you can get some material from that, stuff that I've taught at my church. But the one we're interested in for tonight is the PDF deck. Right there. Okay, I really like that one. That's a cool sound. So you click on PDF deck, and you will get an alphabetized list of the various PowerPoint presentation decks that I've created that put in there. So the one you're interested in is actually a whole bunch of them. Particularly tonight, we're just doing some slides out of the introduction. But you can see how detailed that goes all the way down. All of those are several hundred slide long PDF decks. Now I need to warn you, however, that, you're welcome to getting any of those PDF decks, but it might be possible that you're going to see perhaps a slide that it isn't really obvious what that point was because you didn't hear the talk that went along with it. So, if you want to email me, then you can say, what was that? But what has tempted me to do is maybe just stick a totally superfluous picture right in the middle of one of the PowerPoints to see somebody to call me up and go, Richard, yeah, I was looking at your thing on the existence of God. So exactly what is that ha-de-da argument for God's existence? Because that one, I think, gets a lot of purchase around here. Stuff. Well, now, when you talk about the occult, there are many facets and faces that comprise occult thinking. We're going to focus primarily on the two of Satanism and witchcraft in these few minutes together, but I want you to see the spectrum And you're going to ask yourself, perhaps, well, why are these things all called occult? Now, this is how I catalog them for the course I teach at the seminary on new religious movements. And by the way, if I trip over this cord and fall down and break my neck, then we just get out early tonight. There's extra coffee in case that happens. So, this is how I catalog or kind of split up the data. I've got extreme cultism, that would be Satanism. This is Anton LaVey, who founded the Church of Satan in the 1960s in the United States. He wrote the Satanic Bible and also Satanic Rituals. But you can see other works related to Satanism, like Blanche Barton's book, The Church of Satan. In fact, I actually wrote a cover story for the Christian Research Journal, which is an apologetics journal in the United States. So the cover story was Satanism, A Taste of the Dark Side. So you can get this article off of the website. You just go to papers instead of PDF decks. So again, richardghowe.com. So now I want to just make sure that I can quell any rumors that might already be festering here. So this is pretty self-explanatory, but just in case. So there's Anton LaVey, Church of Satan. And, well, we'll see. I'm just saying, you know. I don't know if it's a coincidence or not. So just in case, we go, okay, so that guy that spoke on Satanism, was he for it or against it? I wasn't quite sure. All right. So now a more moderate kind of occultism, but they're all still occult. That's what you'll look for here in the next few slides. Well, what do you mean by occult? Why are you calling these things that seem at one level different from each other still something common? So a moderate occultism would be witchcraft. Here's Donald Frew of the Covenant of the Goddess in California. It's a consortium of Wiccan organizations in the state of California. Here's just some sample works. There's Janet and Stuart Farrer's Witch's Bible Complete and Gavin and Yvonne Frost's Magic Power of Witchcraft. Now, I have all of these in my library. In fact, most of these are just scans of this stuff. And I have to tell you, one time, I mean, if you grow up in a small town in Mississippi where I did, and you study the occult, you get a reputation. So these people, this friend of mine invited me and said, hey, would you come to this single adult group and tell us a Christian perspective on the occult? And I said, sure. So I would carry these things around like show and tell. I would have my Ouija board and crystal ball and tarot cards and Indian fetishes and my satanic Bible and all. So now during the Q&A, because most of the people there didn't even know me, they're just like, we're all sitting around in someone's living room, around the wall, you know, in chairs and couches. And this lady goes, well, how do you read all this stuff and it not affect you? I went, it does affect me! And I just screamed and lunged for her throat. Because everybody got real tense during the study. And I figured, I got to break up the tension here a little bit. Now, I also wrote a cover story for Christian Research Journal on witchcraft, titled, interestingly, Witchcraft, It May Not Be What You Think, is the title. And I interviewed Donald Frew twice over the course of time, writing several articles on witchcraft. So again, you go to richardghowe.com, go to papers, and then you can find witchcraft, modern witchcraft, it may not be what you think. But a more mainstream kind of occultism, certainly mainstream in the United States, whatever I mean by occultism, because I haven't really said yet, well, what is that? Is the New Age movement. And we won't talk about that tonight, but you'll start to perhaps see connections between what I'm going to say tonight and things that you may already be familiar with regard to the New Age influence in South Africa. So probably the biggest ambassador of New Age thinking in the United States is Oprah Winfrey. But you see representative works like Eckhart Tolle's A New Earth or The Secret, or now the big thing that just came to my attention, I don't know if he's local to PE, but a pastor in South Africa is teaching the law of attraction. What I hope you'll see tonight is this kind of doctrine is exactly what you would learn in witchcraft and Satanism. But it's a lot more mainstream because people, at least in the U.S., are getting more and more used to this view of reality that we label occult. And then perhaps the most startling of all is what I call Christian occultism. I put the word Christian in scare quotes. That means I'm kind of using the word in an unusual way because it's technically not Christian at all. It's really witchcraft with the Christian veneer on it. And that's the Word of Faith movement, as it's most often referred to. And by the way, just in my defense here, my allegation that the Word of Faith movement is occult is actually what their spiritual leaders admit. They admit that it's occult. They just think that proves it's true. They just think it means, well, the witches, they understand some of these secrets that's been lost in the church, and so they think they're trying to reintroduce them. So you've got people like Kenneth Copeland, for example, who's probably the main Word of Faith teacher in the U.S., but representative works, these names may or may not be familiar to you. People like Creflo Dollar or Norman Vincent Peale and many, many others. So this is what we'll mention a little bit more detail tomorrow, as you'll see how this New Age kind of thinking is infiltrating the church. So at least one verse of Scripture I want as my grounding to make the analysis, and that is out of 1 Thessalonians 5:21 and 22. Test all things, hold fast what is good, abstain from every form of evil. Now, when I first got saved, I got saved when I was 16 years old, back in 19... And so, the King James Bible, well, actually English was a little tough for me, as an American, but be that as it may, King James English was even more of a challenge to me. And so I used to think that this verse said, because I think the King James translates it something like, forsake the very appearance of evil, or something like that. And so I used to think it meant that you shouldn't do anything that looks evil. Now that can be wise advice. You don't want to give the appearance and spoil your witness by doing something that may look like you're doing something wrong even when you're not. So I don't have any problem with that wisdom. But I don't think that's what Thessalonians is telling us. Because I don't think it's saying stay away from whatever looks evil. Rather, it's saying test all things, cling to what's good, and stay away from evil no matter what it looks like. Do you see the difference? Not stay away from what looks evil, but stay away from what is evil, even if it doesn't look evil. Now, the ease of being able to talk about Satanism and witchcraft with Christian groups is I've probably never run into a situation where I had someone come up to me and go, well, I don't believe everything in the Satanic Bible, but, I take out what I can use and I throw away the rest. I never had somebody defend the Satanic Bible in a Christian group, even if they've never read it and didn't know anything about it, because it has not only evil, but the appearance of evil. So it's easy to talk about. But when you talk about New Age and when you talk about the Word of Faith movement, now all of a sudden you're talking about things that aren't so obvious to people. So that's why I say, well, what we've got to do is find, well, what is the core view of reality that that is the occult? And that's what I want to do that. So how do you test all things? Well, without argument, I would suggest there are two elements: sound reason, whatever that looks like, and Scripture. Sound reason and Scripture. That's what we want to do to test all things. So what does it mean when we say something is occult? Well, the word occult should not be confused with the similar sounding English word cult. So you talk about the cults like Mormonism or Jehovah's Witnesses or cults. Something is occult because it has something to do with being hidden or secret. It comes from the Latin word meaning secret or hidden. There are other terms, however, that you hear. I've already mentioned Satanism and witchcraft and New Age and then Word of Faith, but other words that may come up that are occult in terms of its view of reality would be things like mysticism or Satanism, which we've already said. Zen Buddhism is occult. Paganism is occult. Esoteric beliefs, sorcery, witchcraft we've mentioned, spiritism, shamanism, Hinduism, magic, Taoism, or Eastern philosophy. Now, I want you to know that there are very, very important differences between these groups. So a witch and a Satanist have very different views about a lot of things. But despite the fact that there are important differences, there's something core that makes them all properly occult. So it'd be analogous to, well, you got Baptists and Presbyterians and Methodists, and you say, well, there are differences between these different groups, and those differences can be important, but there's still something common that we call them all Christian, right? There's a core, what C.S. Lewis calls mere Christianity. Well, if you will, there's a mere occultism. What is that mere occultism? Each of these groups hold some basic ideas that they regard as hidden or secret from the general population. We can get into details as why do they think it's hidden or secret, but for the sake of time, whatever explanation they have as to why it's hidden or secret, they think there are some basic truths that have escaped the notice of most human beings. What are some of those truths? And I'm arguing they're not truths at all. They're false views of reality. One of them is this idea of spiritual law. In fact, this is what the law of attraction is all about. So the spiritual law is this. It's the notion that the spiritual or non-physical realm operates according to laws or regularities just like the physical realm does. So much of the occult practice is mastering these, quote, laws in order to manipulate the spirit realm to get a lot of physical results. This is sometimes called magic. Now, I would think that, in fact, I would argue that whereas the cause and effect kind of relationship aspect of the physical world is what we call modern science. You learn how to heat water a certain temperature and it boils. Or you mix these chemicals together and they form this third compound. And we just learn those laws of the physical world. Applying that same paradigm of laws that govern the non-physical realm is the essential element of an occult view of reality. And I'm arguing that is a false view of reality. There are no laws that govern the spirit realm. So, natural science, then, is mastering the laws that describe the behavior of the physical realm to enable us to control physical things and forces for the purpose of manipulating the physical world. Got that out in one breath. Occultism, then, would be mastering the laws that describe the behavior of the non-physical realm to enable us to control non-physical things by forces for the purpose of manipulating the physical world. They want to do these rituals and incantations and spells to manipulate these spirit forces to have some physical manifestation, a healing or some kind of curse. So I like natural science. I think that's a good thing. But I don't like occultism. I think that's a bad thing. So in case you're not sure what side I'm coming down, I'm saying that's a good thing, that's a bad thing. Now, let's get a few quotes out just so you'll know I'm not making this up. Anton LaVey says, "Magic is the change in situations or events in accordance with one's will, which would, using normally accepted methods, be unchangeable." Well, what are normally accepted methods? That's the methods of science. Just, you learn physical laws to manipulate physical reality. These are not normally accepted because these are sort of metaphysical and magical kinds of things that you do. So magic is never totally scientifically explainable. He goes on, there's a balance in nature and natural order. That's God and that's Satan. Satan is God. He's a representation of the state of flux. He's the action-reaction, this sort of mechanistic kind of view. He's the cause and effect. He's all the elements interwoven in what we call evolution. Now, I actually have a whole presentation just on Satanism. So you might wonder, well, why didn't you do that? Well, I wanted to get this basic worldview stuff out first because that's essential to go on to understand the more specific things about Satanism. But I'll tell you this about Satanism by and large as an American phenomenon and by extension an international phenomenon. Anton LaVey doesn't even believe in the existence of Satan. So Satanism, by and large, has nothing to do with Satan. It's just he picks Satan because he's against all of the things that the Christian church is for. Or more specifically, he's for all the things that he thinks we're against. Like promoting yourself and getting revenge and fulfilling your lusts and just grabbing all you can and just everyone else be gone. That sort of philosophy of life that he celebrates, well, the Christians call that satanic. Okay, well, I guess I'm satanic. And he picks that imagery. So what you'll get in the deck are just a number of quotes from the witches and the Satanists and others making this point about the the non-physical world being able to be manipulated by these forces, or not forces, but laws. Now, what's the problem with that? Well, practically speaking, I think here's one of the biggest problems, besides the fact that it's just false. But I like to contrast this sort of mechanistic way of understanding things that these just happen according to laws with the personal dimension. So compare this, for example. Suppose a child goes up to a candy machine. So the child puts a coin into the slot, pulls the lever, the candy bar comes out. Now that sort of operation is just completely mechanical. It's not like the machine is so grateful that you put a coin in its slot. It just decides, you know what, he's a pretty good kid. I'll give him a candy bar. That's not what's happening at all. It has nothing to do with any personal relationship. It's just the laws of physics as he pulls the lever and puts the coin and all that kind of stuff. Now contrast that with the same child going to the parent wanting a piece of cake. And so, Mommy, can I have a piece of cake? Yes, you ate all your vegetables. You can have a piece of cake. Now there, it's not like the child just walked up to Mom and pushed her belly button and the Mom coughs up a piece of cake. That's not at all. It's not mechanistic. It's personal. right? Because the mother has the best interest of the child, and she decides whether or not the child ought or ought not have cake in this one instance. In a different situation, they might not get the cake. So you see that difference there is our relationship with God is not a relationship where we just speak things and I just declare it and I confess it and I agree and do all this, and all of a sudden God just sort of and he just does what he does. That's not at all. It's more analogous to a relationship of a child to parent. In fact, the Bible uses that imagery very often. Another element of an occult view of reality is this idea of the force. There's some kind of force that these laws are all about. Now, by the way, what that force is, according to the occultists, and what's the best way to manipulate that force through these laws, according to them, that's what makes the difference between a witch and a Satanist and a sorcerer and a Zen and a Hindu. They have different views about what the force is, but they all agree that the force is. They just may have different views as to what it is, and certainly they have different views of what's the best way to manipulate it. So there's a hidden force or energy that one can tap into for healing or harm. And now exactly what this is, I got a little ahead of my slides here, is this what makes the difference between the different groups, exactly what that is. But the fact that there is this force is really the basis of an occult view. You've got the laws that govern, and then the force that's behind it. Now, how is this force described in some of these different groups? Well, some of the terms they use to describe it makes it sound like they think it's a personal kind of entity. Other ways they describe it makes it sound more impersonal, like an energy, like electricity or gravity. So, for example, in Wicca, in paganism and witchcraft, it's getting in touch with Mother Earth or Mother Nature, sometimes called Gaia. If you've heard of the Gaia movement, that was big in the United States back in the 80s. It sort of died away. But that's what the witches call it. It's like a living feminine energy and feminine deity, which is the earth is her body. In certain Eastern philosophies, it's called the life force. Like the prana or the ki or the chi, same idea. In like Hinduism, for example, would call it the prana. In Buddhism or martial arts, you call it the ki or the chi. Now, I'm not saying everybody's doing martial arts is a Satanist. That's not at all what I'm saying. I'm just saying this view of reality is a false view of reality. You know, there's nothing satanic about doing push-ups on your thumbs. You know, I can do a push-up on one thumb. Oh, you Satanist, you? That's not at all. In fact, Satanists actually think that this is some kind of emotionally induced energy, almost like adrenaline that you go through. It was real popular. It's not so popular now, but in some literature in pop psychology, it was right brain versus left brain. Now, there are differences between the right brain and the left brain and the corpus callosum that connects them, but a lot of this pop psychology, in my judgment, was just a pseudo-scientific way of describing this same kind of force or energy that you could tap into through certain states of consciousness. In some New Age, it's just called the universe. But in Star Wars, it's called the Force. In fact, you can ask Simon about this if you want, or you can ask me for that matter. But I do a whole presentation just on Star Wars. And that's the most fun because there it's less of me talking and more clips from all but the last movie, basically, because it hadn't come out yet. So that's a fun one to do, and I try to show this is, and by the way, a lot of people would be surprised, George Lucas is deliberately trying to say something. It's not just accidental. He knows what he's trying to convey, and he actually believes this stuff. And I'm not suggesting, well, you shouldn't watch Star Wars because it's satanic. That's an important question to answer in one's own heart and their relationship with God. But to me, there's an anterior question that has to be settled first. What is the message? That's where I think people get deceived, is they don't even pay attention to what the message is, and then it becomes to subtly alter their view of reality. They just sort of by osmosis pick that up. I just wanted to use the word osmosis. Slip that in. Don't try this at home because I'm a professional. Okay, so it's very dangerous to just slip in osmosis. You might get slapped for that or something. But you hear terms like getting in touch with my higher self or my deeper self or my subconscious. It's the same thing I think that Carl Jung was talking about in the collective unconscious. It's things like the inner counselors, any number of self-help groups from Silva Mind Control to just dozens and dozens of these. You can go to the self-help section of a bookstore, and they all tell you how to get into these inner counselors by certain meditative techniques. Some of them even sound religious, like the spirit guides or the spiritual hierarchy that you see in the New Age movement and in shamanism. And probably the most ominous of all are the extraterrestrials, or ETs. In fact, at the risk of being oversimplified, in the 19th century, you would have someone who said, you know, an angel came to me, took me to heaven, and taught me these doctrines, and you'll get things like Mormonism or Jehovah's Witnesses. In the 20th and 21st century, it's the extraterrestrial came to me and took me to his UFO and taught me all these things. And you step back and go, well, wait a minute. What this extraterrestrial is teaching you is the same thing 100 years ago that these angels were teaching people. And I look at that and go, it's the same false view of reality that's been in the occult since we've been knowing there was an occult. And I would argue, though I may not have time to argue it tonight, it's actually what you find in the Garden of Eden. In fact, I'll probably try to squeeze that in at the very end. So for the sake of time, I'll just ask you to, well, you can go and get the quotes from people like Gavin and Yvonne Frost, or again, Anton LaVey, or people like Chaz Clifton in his Modern Rites, Witchcraft Today. All of these are from my library, or even Stuart Farah, What Witches Do, or even Scott Cunningham, The Truth About Witchcraft, to get the same idea that there is this force out there. And as I said, you even see it in things like Star Wars and the entertainment industry, and you see it in the church. This is what some of the Word of Faith preachers think faith is, that faith is some kind of force that you use. Then another doctrine, as we wind this down, is this idea of human divinity, that in some respects, all human beings are God. In fact, the goal of the occult is to realize one's own divinity or godhood. Now, it might not always use the word divinity or godhood. There are ways to try to usurp God's role in your life. There are ways to do that without calling what you're doing, I'm trying to be God. But any attempt to be the master of your own destiny and the arbiters of your own values and the captain of your own fate is trying to illicitly usurp God's role as our maker. No. He's the one that decides destiny. He's the one that is the ground of all goodness and morality. So how does one do this? Well, you actualize it by the application of these various techniques that I'll mention, maybe one or two for the sake of time. Certain types of techniques that you learn. That you learn in order to actualize your godhood, if you will. Richard Cavendish, who was a historian of religions in the UK, in his book, The Black Arts, says this. He said, carried to its fullest extreme, the black magician's ambition is to wield supreme power over the entire universe to make himself God. Anton LaVey says something very similar in the Satanic Bible. But Margot Adler, who probably says it most directly. Margot Adler was an investigative journalist in National Public Radio in the United States. So I tell American audiences is if you've ever listened to National Public Radio, it's likely you heard Margot Adler as an investigative journalist, highly respected journalist. She was a practicing Wiccan witch. In fact, she wrote probably the best book on the subject of witchcraft in contemporary America, Drawing Down the Moon. What does she say here? Well, here's how she says it. The world is holy, nature is holy, the body is holy, sexuality is holy, the mind is holy, imagination is holy, you are holy. A spiritual path that is not stagnant ultimately leads one to the understanding of one's own divine nature. Thou art goddess, thou art God. Divinity is immanent in all nature, as it is much within you as it is without. Now, I think that these various quests for deity in the occult, they're ways of illicitly emulating some fundamental attributes of God. Let me just give you some examples. I think there are occult counterfeits that try to mimic God's omniscience. These are things like clairvoyance, fortune-telling, mind reading, ESP, Ouija boards, tarot cards, crystal balls, dowsing rods, palm reading, spiritism, necrotism, channeling, and all kinds of things. There you see the Ouija board and then the palm reading, and then you see the tarot card. But there's also an illicit occult way of countering counterfeiting God's omnipresence. These are things like astral travel or out-of-the-body experiences or time travel or remote viewing. And I think all of these are Satan's illicit way of trying to do for us what he promised could happen if we ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. When he said, well, God knows the day you have eaten of it, you will become God, basically, is what he said in the Garden of Eden, isn't it? So that's why when you hear these occult groups say, well, you know, you're really God in the flesh, you should hear the hiss of the serpent in that, because that's exactly the lie that Satan told Adam and Eve. And the last one there of these emulating God's attributes is the counterfeiting his omnipotence. These are things like telekinesis, that's like our psychokinesis, where you use mind powers to change things physically. Mind power, mind control, spells, incantations, visualization, creative imagery, guided imagery, and these kind of things. So where does that leave us? Well, what the deck will give you are some of these techniques, some of these ways of manipulating your state of mind, what some people call an altered state of consciousness, a meditative state, where you open yourselves up to these forces. I think, just to jump to the punchline, that what these people are encountering is likely demonic. So that the demonic realm is trying to deceive people into thinking they've got powers they don't have. They really don't have these powers. But they are deceived into thinking they do. Because can a demon, if you say, well, I'm going to use telekinesis and make my mouse move, do you think it's possible that while I go through some gymnastics in my mind, that a demon could move my mouse? And I go, oh, it must be real. I must have all these powers. And what breaks my heart is to think there would be somebody who spent all their life trying to master these powers and that just weren't there. And then the first time they realize they're nothing but dust is when they stand in judgment. And they try to call on all these powers, and they realize this was all a lie. I was completely deceived into that. So what the deck will do is take you into the specifics of some of these that we don't have time to go into tonight. So I'm going to cut off there 4 minutes early, and we can get an extra cup of coffee maybe and stuff. All right? All right, thanks. We'll do Q&A then.
So I hope that you're in my boat and learned quite a lot in that last session. But now we're just going to have a little bit of time of Q&A. Some questions have come through.